You're very welcome today, and thank you for joining us on our webinar on understanding, mitigating, and addressing the impact of ransomware. We are live, and if you have any questions during the webinar, please use the chat function and we will have a full Q&A at the very end. It is an interactive webinar, and we will have a number of polls, 3 polls during the webinar, and these polls will help gauge myself and Nicola as we go through the topics and to see where the audience is at. Within BSI, we speak about organizational resilience, and to our clients, it means coming together with 3 elements that build out resilience for an organization. And they are to have operational resilience, supply chain resilience, and information resilience. And within the information resilience piece, we have our challenges that everybody seems to face at the moment around 4 key areas that we've identified here in the cybersecurity team that need to be addressed in order to be resilient from an information resilience perspective. Those 4 key subdomains are cybersecurity, information management and privacy, security awareness and training, and compliance to requirements. And with that in mind, what we've done is we've built out a series of offerings and services which map directly to those 4 key subdomains on the right-hand side across those areas. And these are the areas we feel our clients should be looking at and organizations should be looking at to ensure that they achieve cybersecurity resilience and to ensure that they can protect your information, your people, and your organization's reputation. BSI are incorporated by Royal Charter and have extensive expertise in the areas of information resilience. We are an independent body with a high level of integrity and are trusted and innovative in the world that we have. We look to inspire trust for a more resilient world. My name is Stephen Bowes. I'm the Global Practice Director for Data Management and Secure Technologies here at BSI. I've spent nearly 20 years working in financial services in a range of technology and management roles, and I've been with BSI since 2013. I've been advising our clients on risk, data, cyber, and cloud security. I'm delighted today to be joined by Nicola Orlandi, who's the Head of Global Data Privacy at Bausch Health Companies, a group that operates globally processing personal data of patients, healthcare professionals, consumers, and employees. Nicola is an Italian qualified lawyer. He's received a law degree from the University of Pisa. And in this role, he's in charge of organizing and developing a global data privacy program that enables consistent and effective privacy practices and supports business projects and developments within Bausch Health. And prior to being with Bausch, Nicola served as head of data privacy for pharma at Novartis International, and he was also head of legal and compliance Sandoz in Italy. Good afternoon, Nicola.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. And really think talking about data privacy in a ransomware attack is quite important, since this may have a significant impact for both business and individuals. Thank you for inviting me again.
No problem at all. So our agenda today, folks, is to discuss ransomware as a threat. What does the threat landscape look like? And what are some of the details around ransomware? We're going to talk about some of the facts and figures just to hammer home some of the metrics, and to really, what we've been finding with organizations is our organizational connections and contacts have been using these metrics to help guide them build up a better security posture within their organizations. It helps them form a business case to enable them to avail of additional services and technologies and so on. We're going to look to understand the anatomy of a ransomware attack, and we've broken into a number of logical phases. And then what we'll do is we'll dissect and break down those phases so we fully understand what the ransomware attack looks like. And then we look at it from 2 angles. We look at it in terms of what are the steps that we can take to mitigate the risk, and specifically mitigate the risk of the ransomware occurring in the first place, okay? And then what we'll do is the second angle we'll look at is in terms of what steps we can take to reduce the impact of an attack should that attack be successful in the first phase. So what can we do to reduce the impact of that? We will have a questions and answers section at the end. Please do pop them into the chat window as you go. We have received a number of queries and questions prior to the webinar, so we'll happily answer as many of those as we can throughout the course. So let's go straight into it. We all know where the threat landscape is. Previously, ransomware was targeting specific industries. It was a more pray and spray type scenario. but that's not the case anymore. It's now industry agnostic. These examples are just from the last month or two, and even not the most recent. But what I wanted to show on this slide here was the vertical agnostic element of it. So it can attack any company in any space. So as we can see, there's a financial company in the top left-hand corner. We've got technology companies being hit. In the bottom left, we've got beer and food companies being hit. And indeed, we're seeing entire cities being attacked. So all the attack vectors are hitting upon all verticals. Nobody is safe effectively from this threat. And then to reiterate that, in a speech just earlier on in this month, Lindsay Cameron, who is the Chief Executive of the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK, which is part of GCHQ, has given a speech, and I'll just really summarize it here. Ransomware attacks are the key cyber threat facing the UK, and the public and businesses must take it seriously. She added, it requires a whole of government response in order to meet the threat. And she's identified additional potential targets and think tanks in the UK, likely to become additional key targets for nation state espionage groups as they seek to gain strategic insights into policy, trade agreements, and commercially sensitive information. Of course, this topic came up in the recent summit with President Biden and President Putin as well. So it doesn't get any higher levels as a threat to our organizations. If you're a public organization, if you're a private organization, irrespective of what vertical or sector that you're in, this is a key threat. So what we'll do is we'll just dive into some of the figures here, and these are just three or four key metrics that we think are of relevance to you guys. The first one is that over half of all ransomware victims will pay the ransom. That was in 2020, 56%. I have a feeling, based on my experience to date, that figure will rise as time goes on. What's interesting is, of those 56%, 32% lost a significant amount of data. So even if you pay the ransomware, depending on the ransomware's path and the strain and the payload, you can still lose a significant amount of data, with 13% of those losing almost all their data. So why are over 56% of clients, or organizations, I should say, paying the ransom? Well, it's probably down to the fact that over 70% are unable to restore their data. So, what we need to understand about that is, people need to know where their data is, and we're going to discuss a big data component in a second. They need to understand the recovery time and point objectives. So, how long does it take to restore the data? And do you know where your data is? So we're going to talk about the data and a big element of it now shortly. $75 billion was the ransomware attacks costing companies a year in recovery costs, and the ransomware revenues were 20 billion. So you might ask the question, what's the difference between the 75 billion and 20 billion? Well, the answer is the 20 billion is to do with the actual revenue by the bad actors. The other money is to do with the remediation work that's required to offset the attack. So there's additional hardware to be procured, training, software, technologies to be implemented, and so on. And it's doubled in size over the last year, from 11 billion in 2019 to 20 billion. And I think it's safe to say, as we've seen in 2021, that as ransomware evolves, you will see that number go up. We also, you could draw a direct correlation between the RAS revenues and cryptocurrency valuations. If you ask for 10 Bitcoin this time last year and 10 Bitcoin this time this year, it's a different monetary amount, because obviously we've seen doubling, tripling, and quadrupling of cryptocurrency values in the same time frame. And that typically then follows on to the average ransomware attack, more than doubling from 115K to 312K. We have seen that there is an evolution of ransomware in the last several years. As it's moved from CryptoLocker some years ago, there's been multiple variations. We've seen WannaCry, Petya, NotPetya, Doppelpaymer, right? And we've seen Conti in recent times. The other element to consider, of course, is the evolution of the attacks. So what we're now seeing, of course, is the double and triple extortions from the single extortion. So the single extortion was simply, there was an infiltration and there would be encryption, and then you had to pay for the decryption key. The double extortion is where there is an exfiltration of data as well as encryption, and that they will threaten to release the data into the wild. And we're seeing triple extortions where they can add on additional attacks such as a DDoS attack or a data leakage to put pressures on organization. So we're also seeing more human operated activities. These are more targeted attacks, less spray and pray, and more targeted, more social engineering focused, and even going so far as to identify cyber insurance coverages. And these RAS revenues, RAS stands for revenue as a service. It's evolving to a full business model. We're seeing these organizations have technical support. They're actively recruiting for individuals. They have affiliate programs, and they're even negotiating, like legitimate businesses. They're negotiating on the prices that are to be paid. So really a massive evolution in tactics from the bad actors. We're also seeing, of course, in terms of the 70%, the one thing what we have seen in the market is the corresponding element with law enforcement. So law enforcement and government bodies will advise you should not pay. And that's an absolutely fantastic policy piece that should be adhered to where possible. But the problem is the do not pay policy is foundationally built on your ability to protect your data. It's financially built on do you know where your data is? Is it being managed and protected? Have you restored it, and have you stored it frequently and recently? As I spoke about earlier on, recovery time and point objectives. Can you recover in a specific time? Can you recover in a day, in a week, in a month? And how far back do you need to recover to? If it's a financial transactional system, you may not be able to go back too far, because even if you went back that far, it might not be of any use to you going forward. I remember working for a financial institution where we had to restore hundreds of gigabytes of data in a short period of time for a specific matter. And we hit data restoration limitations. We hit limitations in terms of tape drives, the ability to run, simultaneous restore jobs, and so on. There are technical constraints to your ability to restore large amounts of data. If it's small amount of data, it's perfectly reasonable, but large amounts. So it really ties into that figure around why more than 56% of ransomware victims do pay a ransomware, do pay the ransom. And Nicola, to bring you in on the data privacy perspective and from your experience in the healthcare sector, what are the key considerations organizations need to think about when it comes to data management and protection?
Yes, Steve, thank you for putting these facts and figures together. It's very significant to see this number in one slide and see how much this may cost to a company in terms of financial, economic impact, in terms of resources, in terms of reputation as well. So in terms in the healthcare sector and more in general, what I want to highlight is that really data that may be subject to a ransomware attack are becoming more and more one of the most important assets for a company. And in the healthcare sector, we are talking about mainly patients' data, so health-related data, sensitive data according to the data privacy rules. And if you think about the huge investment of the company on creating new way to interact with patients or with other stakeholders like healthcare professionals or any other customer or even healthy people in order to help them to prevent any disease or to monitor their health status, you see that the number of data, that personal information that is going to be collected is increasing dramatically in these years, and will increase even more in the future. In the next future, and exposing a company to a ransomware or to a data breach, more in general, is leading really to a company to lose trust of its own stakeholders, patients, or to lose opportunities in terms of research and not to give any benefit in the end to the patient. That is what healthcare and the pharma sector is intended to do as well. And in that sense, it's important to consider that protecting personal information is becoming crucial to protect the individual, to protect the companies, and not putting any individual at risk in case data will be no longer available or not properly available to the patient or to the company, or in case some personal information will be disclosed or will be treated to be disclosed. You can only think to the case where some information will not be available to an hospital or to a healthcare institution in general to treat a patient. The impact is huge and is terrible for the patient. So it's important that the companies, and this is also crucial for pharma sector, healthcare sector, we'll think about protecting data as a company approach, as an holistic approach in terms of not only talking about security and data privacy, but also talking about the way to protect the company more in general, to enable business continuity, to enable business to reach out business opportunities. So in that sense, I think the aspect of treating or processing personal information is becoming crucial, also in terms of protecting data from any potential breach or ransomware in this specific case.
That's great, thanks, Nicola. So that brings us on to our first poll, which will pop up on your screen any second now. So based on your organization's current business strategy, how big a risk do you believe ransomware is to that strategy? Is it a risk that is being taken seriously and actively preparing for? A risk that we've identified but feel we have it in hand? A risk we've identified and now planning on addressing, or not a risk to our organization? So please do select one of those options to really help gauge where we are with our clients. Okay, so we've seen quite a number are leaning towards a risk that we are taking seriously and actually preparing for. Indeed, being on this agenda, on this webinar is a sign of that. A risk that we've identified, feel we have it in hand. I'm delighted that you feel I have it in hand. That's fantastic. That makes absolute sense if you are happy around your internet-facing posture and your systems. A risk that we've identified are now planning on addressing. So a lot of companies we found are in that space where it was on the risk register but wasn't up at a certain level, and not a risk to my organization. Nicola, any results there that you find abnormal or strange or absolutely correct?
No, on the contrary, I think that 41% to the first, result, the first question, is in line with what I was expecting. And really, it's something that will be taken seriously. Obviously, we have to take it serious, but also it's something that we'll have to that has to be done with a continuous effort. So it's something that has to be an ongoing and continuous interaction between business and privacy and security. So I'm happy to see that the 41% is pointing in this direction, and also happy to see that there are also other cases where the risk is identified and in hand. So that is also a good sign that there is already a high level of awareness in that sense.
Absolutely, and if we summarize it up, 91% have admitted this is a risk, and they will be dealing with it in their shape or form. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on to the anatomy of a ransomware attack. So let's just breaking it down into its component slides. So first things I'll say, there are many variations in the phases, the naming conventions, depending on which organization, which vendor, which framework you're reviewing, which partner you talk to. But these are the 5 key phases that we've identified in the ransomware kill chain, in the anatomy of attack. And so I'm just going to walk us through quite quickly, and what we're going to then do is we're going to break it down as the session evolves. So the initial phase is identification and reconnaissance. Is around exactly that. They're looking to identify organizations as of choice. This is a monetary scheme. They're in it for the money. It's as simple and as plain as that. So they will look to identify organizations that they feel that they can extort money from. And they will conduct reconnaissance like any target. They will look at available email lists. They'll look at spam lists. They'll look to identify email addresses for that organization. They'll look for vulnerabilities in internet-facing systems. So they're looking for to be able to exploit those vulnerabilities. And we'll talk about some of the mitigation around that later on. They're looking to identify and potentially attack people of interest. What we've seen over the years is that's evolved from being previously it would have been the CEO, CFO, people in a high level of power, and they were the ones being targeted, but that has modified in recent years to people in select positions. Those people could be in a specific role within the company, for example, in charge of the payroll, in charge of the financial system, issuing purchase orders in the procurement department, etc., where they have financial authority to a certain level. It could also be, somebody who is easily compromised, somebody who has a weaker set of credentials, not having multi-factor enabled, etc. They're also looking to identify, remote desktop protocol access. So is there a server which is internet facing and has RDP enabled, and they can look to exploit that. The second phase, once they've done their identification, they've identified a company of choice, they've conducted a reconnaissance and identified a number of weak points, shall we say, then they go into the attack phase, which is how they can actually get it, integrate into the system, how they can actually, get engaged. So they'll look to deliver their payload. They look to do that through, it could be through a phishing email with a malformed URL, with a bad link. It could be with an attachment which is malformed. It could be, we've seen various ways of doing this. We've seen, an example would be whereby if companies accept, Word documents as CVs for recruitment positions. That's an example, just a very quick one. Trying to figure out what's the route to get my payload in. What we do know is over 90% of attacks in this phase come through phishing emails. That is available to us. We do know that's coming through phishing emails. And what we also know is from a user interaction perspective, that 99% of attacks require users to interact. They need someone to click on a link, they need someone to open an attachment or to put their credentials in. So these are very interesting. Once we know those statistics, then we can begin to take steps, as we'll detail later on, as to how to mitigate those. The command and control phase is really where they feed back to their control network. Is that they've engaged, they establish a route out, and they connect into that command network communication. From a discovery and spread phase is where they now navigate their way internally through the network. Okay, so what are they looking to do? They're looking to obtain privileged credentials and make their way to the domain controller. From there, they can navigate their way towards file shares, and they will look to identify data of value. And that data of value will vary from organization to organization, but it could be personal data, it could be commercial data, it could be intellectual property, it could be commercially sensitive data, recipes, and so on. I mean, recipes not just in the cooking sense, but obviously in the medical and pharmaceutical sense, etc. Financial data, obviously, and then, as Nicola has alluded to earlier on, healthcare data. They will go from host to host. They will navigate their way. They will pivot their way through, looking for vulnerabilities as they go, looking to elevate their credentials throughout, and they'll do this in a phased way, a very methodical way. They'll also look to cover their tracks as they go. So they do not want to be found at this point in time. And this is a critical phase for defenders, for those of you on the call who are defenders, people who are working in IT support and technical roles. This is the phase, probably the last chance you get before you have to deal specifically with the actual attack itself. They're going to review your backup posture. They're going to look at your backups as well, and they'll look to interfere with those where they need to, in terms of volume shadow copies, in terms of mapped drives, whether it be to a storage area network or a network attached storage. So they will navigate their way through all of those. And in addition to that, then they will look to see your cyber insurance posture, if that exists. They are very meticulous in this element of it, because they'll only ask for money they know they can get paid for. They will not ask a company that has a €2 million or £2 million turnover for a £5 million ransom. It just wouldn't work. The business model doesn't stack up. So they will actually be very meticulous and calculated in terms of working out what the valuation is for the attack. And then we get into the actual, what we call the execution phase. That's where everything happens at very high speed, minutes, hours, if not minutes. So they will look to extract out the data of value that they've identified in the previous phase. They will look to then, once they've extracted out that data, and that's through the command network communication, that's back through the path and route that they've identified previously. They will then look to encrypt the target data. They will have their file dropper. They'll initiate the payload because they know once this initiation takes place, there's no going back. And they also know that the defenders, the people on the other side, on the blue team, shall we say, once the encryption begins, then all the various response playbooks kick in. So the window here is tiny for the attacker to make sure that they're successful in this. And we've seen this recently in Ireland, where 2 departments got attacked pretty much simultaneously with the same strain, shall we say. One was successfully attacked and one wasn't successfully attacked, and it came down to this phase here. So they will encrypt the target data. They will look to compromise the backups because they know the backups are the key element of any no-pay policy. If you have really good backups, you can it's very simple. You wipe the disk, restore the data, and away you go. Very simple to say, not easy to do, especially for multiple systems and large data systems. And then, of course, once they've enabled that system, you can imagine what happens with the target organization. Service desk calls kick in, incident management and incident response kick in. And then ultimately there's a communication of demands, and away they go from there. So in a nutshell, and as I do make the point, there are many variations of these phases, the naming convention and so on. But in a nutshell, this is what we determine to be the ransomware kill chain. So with that in mind, before we go into the dissection mitigation, we have our second poll on the ransomware attacks. So having had a look there in the last slide about what makes up or constitutes a ransomware attack, our question to you, the audience, is what areas do you feel most concerned about? The identification and reconnaissance phase, the attack phase, where they deliver their payload, command and control, where they're talking back to the network, discovery and spread as they navigate internally through the network, or indeed the execution phase, the exfiltration and encryption and payroll demands. So having reviewed those, what areas do you feel most concerned about? Which ones would you be most concerned about? Okay, interesting results here. So most of you feel the identification and reconnaissance phase will be of major concern. The attack phase, a little bit less so, not so much on the command and control. Discovery and spread, the internal navigation to the networks in second, and the execution in the final piece. That's interesting. So you're most concerned about the early elements of the attack, which is interesting. So the next slide will be of interest to you. So that's great. That's fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Okay, so we'll now move on to our dissection. And we're going to break it down, and this is the early phase. This is the one that was most concerned about. And we're going to talk about some of the mitigation pieces. So on the left-hand side, we can see exactly what I spoke about in the last slide, the identification, reconnaissance, and attack phase. And we have identified 4 key areas that we feel you need to be aware of in terms of mitigating this and minimizing the chance of occurring. Okay, so from a people perspective, the first one, look, it starts and ends with people. 99% of these attacks require user interaction. That is a fact, and that's from multiple high-level threat intelligence reports that we've seen through 2020, 2021. Okay, so we absolutely advocate you need to have a really good security awareness training program within your companies. It should be run periodically, at least half yearly, if not quarterly. Annual training doesn't cut it anymore, unfortunately. It needs to be done on a far more regular basis, and that training should include elements such as the ability to spot fake, links, URLs, and they should be aware of how to report phishing attempts and make that as easy as possible. They need to know that they need to notify the IT department of anything suspicious that they see. There should be simulation exercises as we list here. So there should be dummy runs done by the organization in a controlled fashion where you can gauge your maturity in that space. And shared responsibility is very important. People need to understand it's not the head of IT or the CIO's responsibility. Every member of an organization is responsible to each other and to themselves. You have a responsibility to each other and to yourselves. So look to the person to your left and right. They have a responsibility to you, and you have a responsibility to them. It's not just these heads of departments who have the ultimate responsibility, which they do have, but it boils down to having a people aware and have that at a cultural level through the organization. You know, you need to understand that if an attack is successful on us, it could compromise our ability to stay in business, it could compromise our ability to keep as many people employed as we have, and so on. You know, Nicola, the people piece I think is very important. From your experience, you've implemented global data privacy programs, okay? Do you have any tips for the people on the webinar as to how to get people buy-in into programs like this, you know, get them to get invested in it?
Yes, Stephen. I mean, this is a very important point, and really, I've not been surprised by the fact that in the poll, I mean, these two initial aspects were considered the most relevant ones, since they are really pointing to the need to have a global privacy program or security program in a combination of both. This is crucial because in the end, it's the privacy program. It's a way for a company to ensure and demonstrate compliance, and but also a way to detect, to enable the company to detect, to prevent, and in case manage critical situation like a data breach. And a data privacy program always starts with training. We start with awareness. It starts with simulation exercises, as you have already pointed in your slide. And after that, it will come to and will lead to the definition of clear roles and responsibility to point to the right accountability that in the end is not purely on data privacy or on security or on IT, but is on each employee and who has to take responsibility and is accountable to protect the company asset and to report any issue that may be related to the personal information in the company. So then is related to dedicated tools, to dedicated monitoring activities and controls, and then finally is pointing to a clear setup of technical and organizational measures that, as is also required by the applicable laws. And now I'm making reference from a European standpoint to the European regulation, the so-called GDPR, where there is a clear reference on the Article 32 on the technical organizational measures to be implemented to ensure a level of security appropriate to the risk, to ensure confidentiality, integrity, availability of the systems and processing activities, restore the availability and the access to the personal data in a timely manner in case of an incident. So I'm just reading two lines of the Article 32, pointing to exactly the definition of a security framework, security system around the data, personal information, but more in general to any data, sensitive data that is owned and stored by the entity. And I think, Stephen, I'm giving back to you. I mean, the word here, and I think this is exactly what you are pointing on the other topics on your slides. So the technical and organizational aspects to be considered when protecting the data.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And moving on from that, then we speak about having an identity and access management solution. So look, most companies will have this if they're using Microsoft and Office 365. So what we would say is use the features that are available to you in this you know, IAM solution. Build up strong authentication. Have a two-factor or multi-factor authentication enabled across your devices. You want to enable visibility and response to credential compromise and account takeover attacks. So if you have an IAM solution, that'll help you reduce your attack surface with deprovisioning and provisioning. And also you can employ the principle of least privilege. So with this solution, you can enable least privilege access and apply password management policies. So you can enable levels of complexity that will, and indeed the industry is actually moving towards passwordless technologies, which we're seeing now with X509 certificates, where we build up, using trusted platform modules and stuff. So passwords, which are great, but there is passwordless technology available to you. The other element, of course, is the email piece, which is the most successful delivery mechanism for the payload. So email is over 90% of attacks are successful through email. So look, you need to make sure that your email system is in a good place, that you have strong techniques in place, such as reputation-based email filtering. You want to make sure you have white, black, or gray listing. enabled. So obviously that's backed by the threat intelligence of the email security provider. You want to have a really strong antivirus elements to your scanning of your email, your content analysis capabilities, and so on. You may even want to have custom policies and filters which are specific to your organization. And what's very important with any email security system is that it's actively managed. A lot of organizations sometimes put in security email security system in place and they fire and forget it. They put it in and they don't actively manage it. The thing is, you need to constantly tune it from a sensitivity perspective to ensure that you want to balance false positives with legitimate email. You want to ensure your legitimate email is getting through. You don't want to be too rigid and blocking legitimate email. And on the flip side of that coin, you don't want to be too loose and letting in too many unsafe mail contents. So it's a balancing act and needs active management around that. And of course, safe links are redirectional links that will enable a certain amount of filtering on those links. The other piece is advanced threat protection, ATP. So this is an area where you can begin to inspect your traffic. According to the Google Transparency Report of January 2021, 95% of all web traffic is SSL. It's in port 443, and that will vary from country to country. But Belgium is at 99%, the UK is at 93%, and the US at 92%. But look, it's over 90%. If you're not inspecting SSL traffic, you've got a blind spot in your network capabilities, and so you need to be enabling that. Browser isolation is a fantastic technology which enables content to be rendered into the browsers in HTML5, effectively removing the risk of someone clicking on going to a bad link, going to a bad address, and downloading malware from there. So browserization is fantastic. And as I say, backed by high level of threat intelligence, you want to make sure your technology provider has a high level of threat intelligence, so they have a lot of endpoints, a lot of penetration in the market, and they can back up the functionality with data. And finally, from a systems perspective, the patching regime. You know, when we speak about patching regimes, we speak about operating system patches, so Windows patches, and that seems to be where a lot of the focus is. But also we must not forget about application patching. It's very important to get that element done and making sure that you're patched correctly. Firmware, which is the software sitting on servers, it controls network cards and it controls disk controllers. Ensuring that those are patched as well. You know, we've seen in recent weeks, Apple have released a number of iOS versions, 14.5, 14.51, because of a number of security, and the time between them is actually quite short. We've seen organizations now saying, if you have an iOS device, an Apple device, we won't support you unless you're 14.5 or greater, because of the security piece. And one of the questions that came in prior to the webinar, I'll answer it now. People say, look, how will I know if there's ports open? How will I know if I need to patch my system? Well, one way to do that is to conduct vulnerability assessments. And you can scan on your IP ports, and those reports then will tell you which ports are open, what your patching level is at across your applications, operating systems, and all the subcomponents. Taking it a step further, we recommend penetration testing. So what that does, it takes the vulnerability assessment to another level, and there's an active attempt to penetrate into your network using the vulnerabilities that have been identified. And that's exactly what the bad actors do. And so you need to make sure that you have a really good patching regime in place. And finally, you need to ensure that you have technology that can identify assets with misconfigurations. Misconfiguration is one of the top 10 issues that have to be addressed, and that has been identified by OWASP top 10. So these are the steps to look to reduce the impact, mitigate the impact of an attack occurring in the first place. And moving swiftly on through the next stage, which is there we go, is the dissection and mitigation of the discovery, the command and control, discovery, and spread phase. So what we're saying here now is you've been unsuccessful in the previous phase. They have got in. So how do we minimize the impact of that? So the first thing we'll talk about is the administrators, the admins. Okay. We need the admin team, the IT team, to have an elevated awareness of security. They need to go higher than normal users because they do hold what we call the keys to the kingdom. All right. So again, they should be subject to the same training, but enhanced training again. IT is a funny industry. I've spoken about this with previous forums. you know, you don't actually, funnily enough, need to be trained to get a job in IT. There's no requirements, assuming you can get through the interviews and stuff. It's best practice, but there's no requirement. So look, you need to make sure that the administrators have an elevated level of security awareness. They need to ensure that those admins are locked down from identity and indeed potentially a privilege access management side of things. So you may want to consider using privilege access management. What that does is, instead of having a user called Stephen, like myself, who's an administrator, and then if I log on to a server, I can talk to 100 servers. What privilege access management does is it will allow me to log on with an account, but give me a subset of controls. So if I need to go on to patch a server or to restore a database, whatever it is, it'll allow me access to that server and to that database only for a period of time, 2 hours, 4 hours. You can set that by policy. And so what that means is then if that account gets compromised, it's only compromised on that 1 or 2 systems for that period of time. So this is the ability to begin to limit that elevation. And the limitations of administrative use, very important. Do not be into the habit of logging on as administrator all the time. That should be something you only use when you need to do so. Again, points down to the one below it around principal elite privilege. From a data perspective, you want to ensure that you have your data is encrypted. You know, so if the data is extracted from the system, that it is encrypted, that the keys which are used to decrypt are held in a separate location, and so that it's basically a blob of non-usable data to the bad actors. So data encryption is a very, very important. Principle of least privilege, access control lists, and role-based access controls. These are all about giving the users you have in your organization the tools they need to get the job done, but nothing more than that. Okay, so really limiting finance people to the finance system, limiting HR people to the HR system. One backdoor that does occur in organizations, and I'm sure you know about this yourselves, is where somebody moves between departments. So somebody moves from HR to finance, or finance to operations, or whatever it is. And what can happen is that they end up with cumulative groups. So they end up having cumulative access, because their HR system isn't revoked or their finance system isn't revoked when they move, because they're still in the company. They're just moving on to secondment or whatever reason. So that it's very important to ensure that they only are given the tools they need to get the job done. And again, from a data systems perspective, the backup systems, which we will talk about in the next phase, but making sure that your systems are backed up. Also, from a systems perspective, you want to make sure that you have some hardening enabled. You want to ensure that you have you can prevent you know, PowerShell being executed. You want to make sure that you will spot any on the discovery and spread where people are navigating around your network. You can bring in some UEBA technologies, which is user and entity behavioral analytics. So what that does effectively is establishes a baseline of normal activity, and then what it will do is it'll pattern search on that, and if anything becomes abnormal activities, as in somebody's moving through the network at odd hours, or there's volume of data moving between network points, it'll flag that to you and take appropriate actions. So you want to ensure you have alerting enabled for unexpected traffic, anomalous behavior. You want to make sure you have logging. You'll need the logging for any forensics and incident response capability. And you'll want to make sure that you, as part of the hardening, you should be looking at some of the industry standards like CIS controls or NIST or ISO 27000. Look to harden those devices, lock down PowerShell execution, as I said, with application control policies. You'll want to have segmentation in place. So, for example, you might want to create 2 different networks, one for your, you can break it up by function or role. So you can have a HR network, and you can have a finance network, and what that means is they can't see each other. So again, you're making that navigational spread difficult for them. You definitely want to limit internet access to your servers, and you want to prevent users from launching scripting languages like JavaScript and stuff like that. So there's a lot going on there in terms of looking to minimize the damage that can occur if they are on the estate. What can be done? And that leads us finally to the final phase of the ransomware kill chain, which is the execution phase. And we've broken out 3 recommended areas you need to look at. I'll start from the top down, data governance. If you don't know where your data is, you cannot protect it, and you don't want to find out in the middle of an incident that you had data in this cloud repository or in that location or in that server. So you need to, need to do a data mapping exercise. Apologies. press the wrong button. You'll need to do a data mapping exercise. You'll want to make sure that you have identified which data is where, how much data, and what is the data type. Is it personal data, etc. And make sure you have the appropriate protection in place. What we advocate, and this is an old rule going back over 20 years, the 3-2-1 rule. It is an old rule, but it's a good rule. And the 3-2-1 rule is that you must have at least 3 versions of your data going to 2 different locations, one of which is off-site. Okay. If you have all your data in one place, you'll break this rule, but also you'll make it so much easier for them to destroy your data, to impact the data and prevent you being able to restore the data. You'll want to make sure it's encrypted as well. So you want to make sure that the repository, the destination is encrypted, and you want to make sure from a key management perspective, the keys are in a separate location. At the end of the day, if your policy is we will not pay, this area, data governance, incorporating everything I've just spoke about, is the concrete foundation upon which that policy is built. So if you haven't got that in place, that policy is out the window. Data loss prevention, very important on the exfiltration side of things. If people are going to look to, take 100 gig, 200 gig of data out of your network, you need to know about it. So you need to have network visibility around your network. You need to have tools enabled to enable you to look at that. So stuff like a data loss prevention system where you can classify your data, you can be notified if data that meets that classification is being moved, credit card data, project data, you have unique identifiers for your data. You want to have automated actions. You want to be able to, report that that's happening, to block it occurring, to quarantine, to allow whatever actions you determine. You want to have persistent protection of your data. You want to make sure that you've automated responses and that you can, that you can correct policy violations and you can stop the threats. And from a CASB perspective, CASB is a cloud access security broker. As the word broker indicates, it sits between your organization and the internet, and it will enable you to see what the cloud traffic is. It'll enable you to see what sites are being used, and it can apply DLP policies available that will implement those policies and prevent that data being exfiltrated. So you will be notified ahead of time as you see 50, 100 gig of data moving quite quickly. You'll see which cloud location it's going to, and then you'll be able to automatically block that depending on the policy you put into place. And the final piece of the mitigation is around the team. It's around the management team. This has to be identified as a business problem. It's not an IT problem. There has to be ownership and planning of this. There should be a strong level of communications and collaborations. You need to have conducted incident response exercises. You need to have documented the results of those plans. You need to know who is doing what and where. I liken it to a ship hitting an iceberg. That when that happens, the last thing you need is the captain running around trying to figure out what to do. What should happen is every single member of the team should know exactly what they need to do, and they should enact the plan and execute what they need to do. So ownership, planning is key, and you should run through that plan throughout the entire year as the year goes on. Nicola, before we move on to the last call to action, what are the legal compliance ramifications from a data loss, and what steps from your side and experience should be taken by an organization if these steps are not successful?
Yes, I know it's another important point, and I think we have touched already under management, under data governance, and more from a technical point under data loss prevention protection. The main aspect to be considered in terms of legal impact, a legal compliance ramification of a data breach. For sure, there is a need to understand what happened, in case of data breach, but before that, and then to take all the needed assessment to see the likelihood and the severity of the risk for the individuals, and then obviously as a consequence also for the company that may lead to communicate to the individuals or to notify the data privacy authorities as a consequence. But before that, there is, as you mentioned, a need to define a clear governance on that. Clear governance means to have in place a reporting process with dedicated rules and roles, to have in place a dedicated recording of processing activities and dedicated assessment of the risk processing activities, where at risk, where there is a way to understand what data is there, where data is stored internally, externally, and who may have access to the data, so that we know exactly what may be the impact, and we know exactly and we define exactly from a company perspective what are the measures, technical, organizational measure to put in place in order to address any potential risk that may be related to these processing activities. So it's before any issue will happen. I mean, it's and to avoid that any issue, any breach will happen. It is important and crucial to define this clear governance and clear roles and responsibility that will help also to manage in the worst case an issue, a breach, since this will help to understand who is doing what measure will have to be taken, and to define exactly what is the risk, the potential risk related to the data, and take any appropriate action. So it's a combination of effort, and if we look at that, it's generating a positive loop where the company is monitoring, is improving the internal processes based on the risk, based on the state of the art of the technical organizational measure. So again, it's an ongoing process that will allow to keep data and in the end also the company protected.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're going to go to our final poll now, and we will have a call to action and a Q&A after that. So our final poll question will pop up now. Which of the following information resilience areas are you most concerned about? So email security and phishing prevention, people security awareness and training, the advanced threat protection, systems testing, misconfiguration, remediation controls, or data management, protection, recovery. So basically, of the mitigational steps that we've outlined in the last couple of slides, which of the following ones would you be most concerned about? Which ones would you want to put most focus on? We're going to do a call to action after this poll, and then we'll hopefully get some time to answer some questions. Okay, so what are we seeing? We're seeing 22% on the email security side. So it's a bit of spread across all of them, really. People security awareness and training is just slightly above that. Less so on the ATP side. Okay, that makes sense. Systems testing, misconfiguration controls, and data management. So really the first two and the third. That makes absolute sense. Look, the first one is around prevention. First two are about prevention of the event occurring in the first place. So really most of you are worried about those two. And the last one is about what to do and what's our fallback if the attack is successful. So that makes perfect sense. Okay, so moving swiftly on, we will move on to our call to action. Okay, first thing, look, you need to understand the threat landscape and your organization's posture. You need to understand the components of an attack, the various phases. Then what you need to do is map those to what you have currently in place in your organization to mitigate those risks of it occurring and to reduce the impact. And then you need to do a gap analysis. Where are my obvious gaps? Am I good at preventing it, but I'm not so good at if it occurs, what happens afterwards? Or am I really good? I've got really good backups and I have good, strong network visibility and it can be, but maybe I'm less strong in the early phases. So understanding that and mapping it is very important. Clearly defined and practiced incident response plan. You need to ensure you've completed the ransomware tabletop exercise. If you've not already done so, that'll be the first call to action. Please do schedule it internally and get on with it. You need to ensure that your boardroom involvement is critical. You know, as we call out, this ties into the third one. It's a business risk, not an IT risk. If you do this, it will result in a tuned and repeatable incident response playbook. Everybody will know what everybody else's responsibilities are, who's doing what and when. You know, the plan will kick in, who's communicating with the media, who's notifying the appropriate bodies, who's engaging from an IT perspective. Don't just rely on the IT team on this one. And this response will be crucial to all of your organizational stakeholders, from staff themselves who'll be worried about it. They might read about it in the press, they'll know about it internally, to clients, regulators, and indeed, if it so warrants, the general public. Ensure the ransomware is treated as a business risk as against an IT risk. Look, no C-level executive wants to be that person in the media explaining what they did do or what they didn't do and witnessing the corresponding fallout. So board buy-in is key. Funding will need to be made available to shore up the security models for organizations globally going forward. We're seeing that now. But I think if there's any good to come out of the recent spike in attacks, is that it's pushed ransomware and cybersecurity and cyber resilience to the boardroom agenda, which is great for those of us who have worked for years, tirelessly for years, to protect organizations. There has to be an investment in people and processes and technologies, and that will be required, and indeed will be expected by organizational stakeholders. They will actually look to invest in companies who have a very strong cyber resilience posture or maturity rating. And the final one is communications and collaboration is key. Time is of paramount importance. Early warning will give technical teams time to respond. Collaboration between the internal teams when preparing for and potentially responding to an incident is crucial. And you need to work with your service providers to ensure that they're agile, they're listening to your requirements, and provide the appropriate solutions and services. Nicola, do you have any final words for our attendees before we answer some questions that they've posed to us?
Yes, Stephen, I think you have summarized very well. I mean, what I wanted to say also from my side, that is a company effort. It's a company risk to be managed by board. It's not purely a matter for a subject matter expert in privacy or on security. So this is pointed to the fact that there must be a dedicated organization, governance, plans, resources to prevent and react fast in case of issue. So and these I want to add at the end, is really it's a way to protect the company, but in the end it may be also considered a competitive advantage and a way to gain trust of companies external stakeholders, since we will be able to demonstrate in that sense that we are doing things properly and with clear and dedicated governance to manage data and protect data.
Okay, fantastic. So we have some questions. So I'm going to go through them in no specific order, and hopefully we'll get through a few in the 3 minutes. Is there any law about paying ransoms? Is a question that's come in. No, it is not illegal to pay a ransom. It is advisable not to do so, and that is what has been issued by law enforcement globally, as it's a self-propagating industry. Insofar as the more successful and lucrative those attacks become, the more popular they become, so you get more attacks. So it's self-propagating. But there is no law about paying ransoms. It's not illegal to pay a ransom. Is software recommended to try and prevent an attack? Well, yes. And we've discussed quite a number of software options there. We've spoken about email security. We've spoken with, about data loss prevention, talk about data backup and data recovery and so on. BSI here in the cybersecurity team, we do partner with leading technology partners like Proofpoint, McAfee, Druva, and Zscaler. So yeah, there is multiple softwares available to prevent an attack, and they should be used accordingly, or indeed use the ones that you have in a more successful way. Next question, is it known or has it been discovered what is the most successful method used for the malware code used to enter the victim's network? Well, look, statistically, it's phishing. Okay, not over 90% delivery is phishing, but look, the easiest one is the most successful one. So if systems aren't patched, if they're misconfigured, if we have careless users, all of those are routes in. But statistically, over 90% of the delivery is through phishing email. So a really strong email security solution is advised. Next one. What ports or tools can we use to find these ports that ransomware typically uses for IT teams who are not cyber analysts? In other words, normal IT support to have to live with this threat. That's a good question. Yeah, look, you'll want to enable scanning on your IP addresses. You'll need to look for vulnerability assessments. So I would say get vulnerability assessment tools, and then if you want to go to the next level, penetration testing, that'd be best for that. We have a partner with EdgeScan that do that, and we're happy to assist in introducing you to our security testing team and their technologies. And I'm going to do one final one as we come up on the air. Are certain types of virtualization more immune to the effects of ransomware, such as Nutanix? Yes and no. Okay, I'm hedging my bets here, but what I'll explain. Yes, there are platforms like Nutanix and others who have made the processes that we've described in this webinar easier to implement, like role-based access controls, disk encryption, etc. But nevertheless, these require active management and engagement. So it's easy to assume that because you're using a specific platform, you're automatically protected. Not the case. So that's why I said yes and no. We've come up on the hour. I'd like to thank you all. What we will do is this recording will be made available to the attendees. There are many more questions that have been submitted. What we'll do is we'll commit to answering those, and we'll issue them as an FAQ or Q&A data sheet afterwards. And the slides will also be made available to the attendees. So with that in mind, I'd like to thank you all for your time today. Best wishes, and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.